Imagine a ship so enormous that thousands of people can live, eat, work, sleep, and travel inside it.
From the outside, they look like giant ships. But step inside, and something surprising becomes clear. You are looking at a floating city, designed to operate almost like a small town at sea. But how can a single vessel carry thousands of people while moving across an ocean for days or even weeks? And the first secret is simple. Almost every part of the ship has a specific purpose. Think about food alone. Thousands of people need to eat every single day. Behind the restaurants are enormous storage areas filled with enough supplies to keep the floating city running. But food is only one part of the puzzle. Deep below the passengers is an enormous industrial world. And powerful engines and complex systems hidden below the waterline are what keep this enormous structure moving.
And that is only the beginning of the hidden world inside the world's largest ships.
Thousands of private cabins are hidden inside the enormous structure. Some are compact rooms designed for efficiency, while others are spacious luxury suites overlooking the ocean. At the top end, enormous suites can feel more like luxury apartments than traditional ship cabins. Between those cabins are restaurants, shops, theaters, lounges, and entertainment spaces.
Some ships even contain theaters large enough to host full-scale performances.
Above them, the upper decks can look like an enormous floating resort.
There can be swimming pools, sports courts, restaurants, walking areas, and even gardens.
But while passengers enjoy the vacation, someone has to keep the entire floating city under control.
On the bridge, highly trained officers constantly monitor the ship, the weather, and the route ahead.
And controlling something this large in the middle of the ocean is a completely different challenge from driving an ordinary vehicle.
Now consider the most important problem of all. How do you move a floating city this large? Deep below the passengers, powerful engines provide the energy needed to push the enormous vessel forward.
The engines work together with generators, pumps, cooling systems, and countless other machines. Keeping all of these systems working together requires engineers monitoring the ship around the clock. Then there is water. Thousands of people need clean water every day for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and showers. And that means enormous amounts of laundry, cleaning, and daily maintenance happening behind the scenes. Behind the beautiful passenger areas is a completely different network of corridors, elevators, and service spaces. Thousands of crew members work behind the scenes so passengers can experience a seemingly effortless vacation.
And eventually, the floating city has to return to land.
And bringing something this enormous safely into a harbor requires precision, communication, and careful coordination. When the ship reaches port, another massive operation begins, restocking everything the floating city needs. Fresh food, drinks, cleaning supplies, and countless other necessities must be loaded before the ship leaves again. Much of that food must then be stored carefully in enormous refrigerated spaces.
Once everything is loaded, the ship leaves the harbor and the floating city begins its journey again.
But life at sea is not always calm. When weather changes, the crew must constantly watch the ocean and adjust the ship's route.
Modern navigation systems help officers track storms, winds, waves, and changing conditions far ahead. Meanwhile, deep inside the ship, passengers may barely notice what is happening outside.
Safety is another enormous responsibility when thousands of people are living together far from land.
And when you finally see the entire ship from above, its true scale becomes almost difficult to understand.
While passengers sleep, hundreds of crew members continue working behind the scenes.
Even after midnight, parts of the floating city are still alive.
And operating a floating city also means dealing with enormous amounts of waste and recycling.
Modern ships use complex systems to manage water, waste, and other resources while far from shore. And what passengers see above the water is only part of the ship. Below the restaurants, pools, and cabins is a hidden world of machinery, storage, and crew operations. For most passengers, these areas will remain completely invisible throughout the entire journey. Yet every one of these hidden operations is essential to keeping the experience running.
And that is what makes these ships so fascinating. The complexity is hidden behind an experience that feels effortless.
Because once you understand what happens behind the scenes, a giant cruise ship stops looking like a simple vessel. After days at sea, the floating city eventually approaches its next destination.
Thousands of passengers may step off the ship, while another group prepares to begin the same journey.
Behind every arrival is another carefully organized departure and boarding operation.
Even the luggage of thousands of people becomes a massive logistical operation.
Every suitcase has to find its way to the correct part of the ship.
Between journeys, thousands of small tasks must be completed before the next group of passengers arrives.
Then, once again, the enormous vessel leaves land behind. Soon, the ship is once again surrounded by nothing but ocean.
And yet, inside, life continues, almost as if the ocean doesn't exist. And that is the extraordinary secret of these floating cities. They don't simply carry people across the ocean, they create an entire temporary world on it.
But keeping this temporary world alive across thousands of kilometers requires extraordinary planning.
Every department has to work together, because even a small failure can affect thousands of people. And because the ship is far from land, it even needs medical facilities capable of handling emergencies at sea. Regular drills help the crew stay prepared for the rare situations when something goes wrong.
Most of the time, however, the systems simply work quietly in the background.
For passengers, that reliability creates something that feels almost impossible: ordinary life in the middle of the ocean. And when you stand beside one of these ships, its scale becomes even more difficult to comprehend. What looks enormous from the deck becomes surprisingly small when viewed against the endless ocean.
Behind every visible luxury is a complex network of people, machines, and systems working together.
So the next time you see a giant ship crossing the horizon, remember what is hidden inside. Inside, there are entire levels dedicated to living, dining, entertainment, and the thousands of people who make the journey.
From a distance, all of that complexity disappears, and the ship simply looks like a giant building floating across the sea.
But that tiny point on the horizon contains everything needed to create a functioning world far from land. Thousands of people, sophisticated technology, and carefully planned logistics all come together to make that possible.
And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing about these floating cities. For a while, they allow thousands of people to take an entire piece of modern life and carry it across the ocean.